The night Boston froze to -10 degrees. Vincent Moretti watched a family die from across the street. Snow fell in slow, deliberate sheets over Beacon Hill, softening the world into something almost gentle. The Bellante villa stood 3 stories tall at the end of a private drive, its windows glowing orange behind velvet curtains, its chimneys pushing thin gray smoke into the Christmas Eve sky. From the sidewalk, it could have been any other mansion preparing for midnight mass, but Vincent knew better. The orange behind those windows was not firelight. He stood perfectly still, hands buried in the pockets of his long black wool coat, the collar turned up against his jaw. At 26, he was the youngest man ever to wear the ring of the Moretti family, and 3 weeks ago, his father had been buried with 2 bullets in his chest and a rosary snapped in half on his tongue. The order tonight had been the old man's final business, passed down through the consigliere like a last confession. The Bellantes had sold information to the Greco family. The Bellantes had broken bread with traitors. The Bellantes had to be erased before the new year rang in. Tony Ricci emerged from the side gate, his breath clouding in the freezing air, a silenced pistol tucked beneath his overcoat. Snow clung to his shoulders and the brim of his hat. He did not smile, because smiling at work was something only animals did, and Tony had been raised better than that. "It's done, boss," he said, his voice low and flat. "No survivors. Everyone inside, just like you ordered." Vincent did not answer. He was listening to the wind. Somewhere inside the villa, the last echo of a woman's scream had died perhaps 2 minutes ago. He had heard it clearly from the street, the way you hear a record skip in another room. He had counted the gunshots. 7, then silence, then 2 more. A man who ran the North End needed to be able to count. A man who inherited a war needed to be able to listen. He nodded once. "Burn it. Make sure the fire looks electrical." Tony gestured to the men waiting by the black sedans. Gasoline cans clinked. Vincent turned, preparing to walk back to his car, back to the warm leather seats, back to the rest of a life he had not chosen but would not refuse. Then he heard it. A thin, scraping cry, so small it could have been mistaken for the wind sawing through a gutter. But Vincent had grown up in a house that had once echoed with a mother's lullabies, and he knew the sound a baby made when it was dying of cold. The sound pulled him back the way a hook pulls a fish. He followed it into the alley beside the villa, his polished shoes cracking through frozen puddles. Behind a dented trash bin, half buried under a servant's bloodied apron, lay a bundle no bigger than a loaf of bread. A woman's arm was stretched toward it from the snow, already stiff, already gray, the fingers still curled as though she had just let go. The maid had hidden what she could not save. Vincent knelt. He pulled back the apron. A baby girl, no more than 3 weeks old, stared up at him with enormous blue eyes. Her lips were purple. Her skin had the faint translucence of candle wax. She did not cry again. She only looked at him, as though she had been waiting. Tony stepped into the alley, saw the child, and froze. His hand drifted to his holster out of habit, out of the cold mechanics of tradition. "Boss," he said quietly. "The old law. No witnesses. Not even one." Vincent did not look up. Something older than the Moretti Code was rising inside him now. A memory of a 6-year-old boy crouched under a kitchen table while his mother's blood ran along the tile toward his shoes. He had been a witness once. Someone had chosen to let him live. He slid the heavy fur-lined coat off his shoulders. He wrapped the baby carefully, pressing her against the bare skin of his chest where his heart was still beating hard enough for both of them. Steam rose from her tiny face as his warmth began to reach her. He finally looked at Tony. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough to cut glass. "From tonight on," he said, "my law is the law." The black sedan rolled through Beacon Hill with its headlights off, the way Moretti cars always moved after midnight work. Vincent sat in the back with the baby pressed beneath his shirt now, skin against skin, the way paramedics had once taught him during a tour in Sicily years ago. The infant had stopped shivering somewhere near the Charles River. That was either a very good sign or the final one. He could not afford to be wrong about which. Tony drove without speaking. He had not asked another question since the alley. A driver who worked for Vincent Moretti learned quickly that some silences were not invitations. The townhouse on Louisburg Square loomed above the wrought iron fence. 4 stories of old brick and older money, inherited through 3 generations of a family that had arrived in Boston with nothing and now owned half of its shadows. Vincent stepped out of the car with one hand cradling the bundle against his ribs. His breath still smelled faintly of gasoline. Elena Rossi opened the service door before he reached the top step. She was 55 years old that winter. Her gray hair pinned in the same tight knot she had worn since Vincent was a boy in short trousers, her apron still dusted with flour from the Christmas bread she had been baking when the call came. Her eyes dropped to the small shape under his coat. They lifted back to his face. They did not widen. They did not judge. "Warm milk," she said, as though she had been expecting this particular Christmas gift for years. "Formula in the green tin." "I will bring blankets." She turned and walked toward the kitchen without waiting for an answer. Vincent carried the baby down the long hallway, past the oil portraits of men whose names he no longer bothered to learn. At the end of the corridor, behind a cabinet of vintage Barolo, a narrow door opened onto a staircase most guests of the house had never noticed. He had renovated this part of the cellar himself, hiring workers from 3 different states so that none of them could assemble the whole truth. The air at the bottom of the stairs was warm and smelled faintly of lavender and clean cotton. A nightlight shaped like a crescent moon threw soft yellow across the walls. 3 small beds lined the far side of the room, each covered in the same pale blue quilt Elena had stitched with her own hands. In the first bed slept a boy of 6, his dark curls damp from a recent bath. One arm thrown protectively across a stuffed wolf. Dominic. Vincent had taken him out of a burning tenement in Somerville 18 months ago, the only Russo left alive after the Greco family cleaned house. In the second bed, a little girl of 4 breathed quietly through a gap in her front teeth. Isabella. He had found her inside a car trunk near the Chelsea docks, her mother's rosary still clenched in her fist. She had not spoken for 2 months after that night. Now she sang to herself every morning. In the third bed, a toddler barely 2 years old slept with his thumb in his mouth. Luca. Vincent had carried him out of a restaurant on Hanover Street with blood in the toddler's hair that had not belonged to the toddler. A 4th bed stood waiting at the end of the row, empty, a white cradle already prepared beside it. Elena had been putting fresh sheets on it only an hour before the phone had rung tonight. Vincent had never told her to. She simply always knew. He lowered the baby girl into the cradle. Her blue eyes were closed now. Her small chest rose and fell in even, trusting breaths. Elena descended the stairs carrying a warmed bottle, a stack of soft cloths, and a second blanket she had knit herself in a color she called Sunday morning. She set them down on the nightstand. She looked at the 4 sleeping children. She looked at her employer, a man whose name was whispered with fear in 3 boroughs. "Sir," she said softly, in the careful Italian she only used when she was worried, "are you building a family down here, or an army?" Vincent did not answer. He watched the baby's lips part around the rubber nipple of the bottle Elena now held to her mouth. Color was returning to the child's cheeks in small blooms of pink. "Her name is Sophia," he said at last. "After my grandmother." Elena nodded once. She did not ask what had happened to the mother. She did not ask what the house on the hill looked like now. She only hummed a lullaby under her breath, the same one she had sung to Vincent the night his own mother had been buried in the rain. Upstairs, through the cellar vent, the faint hiss of snow against the windows grew steadier. Vincent stood between the 4 beds for a long time, his coat gone, his shirt still stained with another woman's blood. 4 small chests rising, 4 small chests falling, 4 debts to the dead that he would never be able to repay, only carry. Outside, Boston kept falling asleep beneath a white sheet, unaware that in the cellar of a house on Louisburg Square, the next 20 years of the North End had just drawn its first quiet breath. 2 weeks after Christmas, the front door of the Louisburg Square townhouse slammed open without the courtesy of a knock. Marco Moretti did not remove his overcoat. He did not wipe the snow from his shoes onto the Persian runner the way guests were expected to. He walked past Elena with the briefest nod of recognition and headed straight for the study at the end of the west corridor, where a light always burned past midnight and where his nephew always worked alone. At 40 years old, Marco carried the weight of the family name differently than his older brother had. Where Vincent's father had ruled with quiet menace, Marco ruled a room with his voice, his gestures, the sharp precision of a man who had spent 2 decades as consigliere whispering into other men's ears. He had been the one who read the will. He had been the one who handed Vincent the ring, and he believed, with the full certainty of an uncle who had watched a boy grow into a don, that the boy still listened when he spoke. Vincent was standing at the window when Marco entered, a glass of grappa untouched on the desk behind him. He did not turn around. "Close the door, Uncle." Marco closed it. Then he turned the lock. "I came from the Esposito meeting," Marco said, keeping his tone low. "Do you know what they asked me tonight? 3 capos. In front of 20 men. They asked me whether the new Don has gone soft, whether he is keeping a nursery in his basement like an old maid keeps cats." Vincent finally turned. His face betrayed nothing. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them they were drunk and they should shut their mouths before I shut them for good." Marco stepped closer, his voice tightening. "But Vincenzo, they are not drunk. Someone talked. Someone on the crew that night. Maybe Tony, maybe the driver. It does not matter. The story is out. The dawn of the Moretti family pulled a Belante infant out of the snow and took her home like a stray dog. She is not a stray dog. She is the last surviving witness to a house we burned to the foundation. Marco slapped his palm against the edge of the desk. The grappa trembled in its glass. My brother, your father, rest his soul. He ran this family for 28 years and he never once broke the code. Never. You are 2 months in the chair and you are already turning the North End into an orphanage. Vincent studied his uncle in silence for a long moment. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked through the space between them. I have my reasons, he said finally. You do not need to understand them. I need to understand them. Vincenzo, because I am the one who has to sit across from those capos every Thursday and convince them that the ring on your finger still means something. Marco's voice dropped to a rasp. They see 4 children in this house. 4. They are counting, and they are whispering. Do you know what whispers become when they travel long enough? They become permission. Vincent walked to the desk and sat down slowly. He folded his hands. When he spoke again, his tone had changed, no longer a Don defending himself, but a man making an argument to the only family he had left. Long-term investment, uncle. 20 years from now, those 4 children sleeping downstairs will be something this family has never had. A lawyer who owes us her career. A doctor who signs the death certificates we need signed. A judge who remembers whose hands pulled him out of a burning building when he was too small to remember his own mother's face. Vincent leaned forward. Money does not buy loyalty. I have watched my father try. But the debt of a saved life, carried from the age of 2, compounds for a lifetime. No Greco accountant can outbid that. Marco stared at him. Slowly, the tight lines around his mouth loosened. Not into agreement, but into something closer to reluctant recognition. He had taught Vincent to think like this. He could not entirely curse the result. Fine, he said at last. He walked to the sideboard, poured himself a grappa, and drank it in one motion. Fine, but hear me, nephew. Hear me carefully. He turned, the empty glass still in his hand. One day, one of them is going to find out what happened the night you brought them into this house. The blood on the floor, the parents they will never remember. And when that day comes, no debt, no story, no grandmother's name will be enough. They will look at you and see the man who pulled the trigger, even if your finger was never near it. And on that day, Vincenzo, you will wish you had listened to me tonight. Vincent did not answer. Marco set the glass down, nodded once to his nephew, and let himself out. When the study door clicked shut, Vincent remained perfectly still in his chair. The only sound in the room was the ticking clock and, somewhere far below through the floor vents, the soft whimper of an infant dreaming. Sophia had begun making small sounds in her sleep that week. Elena said it meant she was starting to feel safe. Vincent stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to her breathe through the bones of his own house. 5 winters passed across Beacon Hill, and the whispers Marco had warned about never became permission. They became, instead, a strange and grudging respect. By the autumn Sophia turned 5, the cellar beneath the townhouse had been sealed and forgotten. The children no longer slept underground. The entire 3rd floor had been gutted and rebuilt into a world of pale blue walls, white crown molding, and soft reading lamps that never fully went out. 8 small beds now ran along the bright corridor, each one marked with a hand-painted name plaque above the door. Dominic, 11, Isabella, 9, Luca, 7, Sophia, 5, and 4 more who had arrived in the intervening years, each pulled from a different burning corner of the Northeast. Matteo, Chiara, Gianni, and a quiet boy named Raphael, who had been left in a church pew in Providence with a bullet hole through his teddy bear. Vincent Moretti was 31 now. In the streets, the Morettis controlled 6 neighborhoods, 3 unions, and a silent share of the Port of Boston. The newspapers called him the Iceberg because he spoke only when he had already decided. Rivals who had once sneered at the Don with the nursery now called ahead before entering his restaurants. Some of them sent Christmas gifts to the children. None of them asked why. But every night between 8 and 9, the man the city feared climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, loosened his tie, and sat on the edge of a child's bed with a fairy tale open on his knees. Tonight he was reading to Sophia and Luca. Luca had fallen asleep during the 2nd page, his small hand still wrapped around the silk lining of Vincent's jacket. Sophia had not. Sophia never did. Her enormous blue eyes tracked every word, and when he finished a sentence, she would tilt her head like a small bird and ask the question that always came. Why? Why what, little one? Why did the wolf lie to the little girl? Because the wolf was hungry. But why did she believe him? Vincent closed the book. He had learned by now that Sophia did not accept easy answers. She had begun reading at 3. She had corrected the tutor's Italian pronunciation at 4. Elena had called her, with an affection she reserved for only one of the 8. The little lawyer, because the little girl wanted to believe him, Vincent said carefully. Sometimes we believe stories that are not true, because the truth is too heavy to carry alone. Sophia considered this for a long time. Then she looked up at him with the specific gravity she brought to every serious thing in her life. Papa Vin, she said, why don't we look the same? Vincent did not answer immediately. Dom has brown eyes, she continued, listing evidence the way he had once seen her sort her colored pencils. Bella has red hair. Luca has the little spot on his ear. I have blue eyes. You have dark eyes. Why are we all different if we are a family? He set the book aside. He took her small hand in his. Her fingers were stained faintly with ink from the alphabet she had been copying that afternoon. Because family is not blood, little one, he said. Family is the people who choose to stay. Blood can walk away. Blood can betray. But the ones who choose, every morning, to sit at the same table with you, to close the door softly when you are sleeping, to carry you when your legs are tired, those are the ones who are yours. That is what family is. Sophia did not reply. She only leaned her forehead against his shoulder and was asleep within a minute. Vincent carried her across the hall and laid her in her own bed. He kissed the top of her head the way he never allowed himself to do when she was awake, because fathers in his world did not admit to favorites and dons did not admit to weaknesses. He closed the door softly, as he had promised her years she could not remember. Back in his private study on the floor below, he loosened his cufflinks and bent to switch off the desk lamp. Something glinted beneath the edge of the Persian rug near the baseboard. Catching the last light, he crouched. He pulled at the cold corner of metal. A silver oval medallion came free from between the wooden floorboard and the underside of the rug, where it must have slipped months ago and been waiting ever since. On the back, engraved in tiny script, no jeweler in this city still used, was a single letter. B. Vincent closed his hand over it so tightly the edges bit into his palm. Behind him, the study door creaked open an inch. Sophia stood in her nightgown, barefoot, her blue eyes fixed on his closed fist. Papa, she said softly. What is that? He turned. He opened his hand before he had decided to. The medallion caught the lamplight, and for one suspended instant her small face flickered with the strangest expression. Not curiosity, not recognition, but something older, something that had no place on a 5-year-old. Then he closed his fist again and slid the medallion into his pocket in a single, practiced motion. Nothing, little one, he said, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. Something that belonged to someone who is gone. Go back to bed. She did not move for a long moment. Then she nodded, very slowly, and padded back down the hall. Vincent waited until her door clicked shut. Then he walked to the wall safe behind the portrait of his grandmother, turned the dial, and placed the medallion inside, beside a sealed envelope he had written with his own hand 5 years ago and had never intended to open. He closed the safe. His hand remained on the cold steel for a long time. 5 more years folded themselves into the history of the house on Louisburg Square, and by the spring Sophia turned 10. Boston belonged to the Morettis in ways the newspapers would never be able to prove. The last serious war had ended on a rainy night in October, when the last of the independent crews in Dorchester had signed a quiet treaty in a back room of a seafood restaurant that no longer existed. The Greco family had retreated to Providence to lick wounds and count losses. Vincent, at 36, was no longer the youngest Don in the city. He was simply the Don. Men who had once called him the Iceberg now called him nothing at all when he walked past, because using a nickname implied a familiarity none of them had earned. Sophia, meanwhile, had become the terror of Milton Academy. Not in the way that troubled children troubled their teachers, in the way that precocious children troubled everyone else. At 10, she had skipped 2 grades. She had won the middle school debate tournament by arguing the losing side of a topic the judges had considered indefensible. Her English teacher had sent Elena a handwritten note describing Sophia's essays as unnervingly adult. Her Latin tutor had asked, with some delicacy, whether she could please stop correcting his conjugations in front of the boys. Vincent read every note, every report card, every teacher's email, and he filed them in a leather portfolio in his desk drawer. He had never shown her his pride. He did not believe children should be told they were exceptional. But on certain nights, when the house was quiet, he took the portfolio out and read through it again the way other men read racing forms. On the first Saturday of April, he decided it was time to show her off. The Boston Symphony Hall Gala raised money each spring for the city's children's hospitals. Every governor in living memory had attended. Every major donor in New England sent a representative. Vincent had written a check to the foundation for the past 9 years without ever appearing in person. That year, for the first time, he accepted the invitation, and he brought his daughter. Sophia wore a midnight blue dress Elena had helped her choose. Her dark hair had been pulled into a simple twist. The only jewelry she wore was a small silver cross at her throat. She walked into the marble lobby with her hand resting lightly on Vincent's forearm, the way she had seen grown women do, and she did not look at anything except straight ahead, because he had taught her years ago that looking around was how you announced you did not belong. The room noticed her immediately. 3 senators, a former ambassador, the chief executive of the largest hospital network in New England, a hedge fund billionaire who had flown in from New York for the evening. They all shook Vincent's hand, with the careful courtesy men reserve for a power they do not fully understand. They all bent slightly to greet his daughter, and when she answered them in the complete sentences of a 20-year-old, something flickered across their faces that they were too well trained to voice. Vincent watched them not ask the question. He had counted on it. In rooms like this, curiosity was a luxury only the powerful could afford, and no one in this room considered themselves more powerful than the man at his left cuff. Sophia excused herself to the dessert table near the east wall during the speeches. She was reaching for a small plate of raspberries when 2 voices drifted down from the alcove above her. A man and a woman, clearly assuming no one small could overhear. That child with him? Have you seen her? The little one in blue? Yes. Do you think she is actually Vincent materialized at Sophia's elbow before the sentence could finish? He placed a hand gently at the small of her back. Come, little one, he said smoothly. The mayor wants to meet you. He steered her away without turning his head toward the alcove, but Sophia saw the small muscle that tightened in his jaw, the way his hand stayed at her back a beat longer than usual, the way his eyes swept the room once, counting exits the way he counted everything. The ride home passed in silence. Sophia watched the lights of Starro Drive slide across the window. She turned the silver cross at her throat between 2 fingers. She waited until the car had crossed onto Beacon Street before she spoke. Papa, yes, am I your real daughter? Vincent did not answer immediately. The driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror and away again, with the trained blindness of men who had long ago learned not to hear anything in this particular car. Outside, a streetlight passed across Vincent's face, and for a moment Sophia saw something she had never seen on her father, an expression she would not have a word for until many years later. It looked almost like fear, then it was gone. He turned to her. He took her small hand in his, the way he had the night she had asked about the wolf, and his voice was quiet and absolutely certain. You are my daughter, Sophia. More than anything else in this world, you are my daughter. She nodded. She did not ask again. But that night, long after Elena had kissed her forehead and turned out the lamp, Sophia lay awake staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in her small and carefully guarded life, she began to understand that some answers were not answers at all. They were walls, and behind every wall, there was a room. The call came at 3:47 in the morning, and Sophia would remember the exact time for the rest of her life, because that was the hour the house learned how to be afraid again. She was 13 that autumn, tall for her age now, with the coltish angles of a girl who had started to grow faster than her own face could keep up with. She had been woken not by the phone, but by Elena's footsteps running down the 3rd-floor corridor, because Elena Rossi had not run anywhere in 12 years, and the sound was wrong in a way Sophia's body understood before her mind did. She crept to her bedroom door and opened it a finger's width. Vincent was already standing in the corridor, half-dressed, one hand braced against the wall. His phone was pressed to his ear. He was not speaking. He was only listening, and his face had gone the color of paper that had been left too long in the sun. Elena reached him, whispered something, and he shook his head, once, sharply, as if refusing a meal he had been offered. Then he lowered the phone from his ear. He did not hang up. He simply let his hand fall to his side. The tiny voice on the other end continued talking into empty air for several seconds before the call ended on its own. Who? Sophia whispered from her doorway, before she knew she had spoken. Vincent looked at her. In 12 years she had never seen his eyes look like that. He did not tell her to go back to bed. He crossed the corridor, knelt in front of her, and placed both hands on her shoulders with terrible care, the way a man handles something that might shatter. Dominic, he said. That was all he could say. The wake was held 3 days later at the oldest Catholic funeral home in the North End, the one the Moretti family had used since before the war. Men in black overcoats lined the sidewalk for 2 blocks. Women Sophia had never seen before kissed her on both cheeks and wept into handkerchiefs embroidered with initials she did not recognize. Dominic, 19 years old, had been ambushed coming out of a pharmacy in Medford. 2 shooters, a stolen car, no arrests, and everyone in the room already knew there never would be. Sophia stood beside Vincent at the head of the casket. Isabella, now 17, wept silently on her other side. Luca, 15, stared at his shoes. The 5 younger ones had been kept at home. 1,000 people filed past the body. 1,000 times Vincent shook a hand without breaking his stillness. Sophia watched him. She counted. She did not see him blink. It was only when the priest began the committal prayer at the graveside, hours later, when the snow was beginning to fall for the first time that winter, that Sophia felt Vincent's hand in hers tighten once, almost imperceptibly. She looked up at him. A single tear had traveled the length of his cheek and caught on the edge of his jaw. He did not wipe it away. He did not acknowledge it. He simply let it fall into the collar of his coat and continued staring into the open ground. And Sophia understood, in that moment, that she had just witnessed something no one else in the world would ever be permitted to see. That night the house filled with men, and then slowly emptied of them. By midnight only Marco remained. Sophia heard their voices through the floor vent as she lay pretending to sleep. She slid out of bed. She patted down the service stairs in her socks. She stopped at the crack of Vincent's study door. Marco's voice, low and tight. "There. I told you. I told you, Vincenzo. 10 years I have been telling you. Those children are not investments. They are a liability. They are a signature. Every one of them walking around this city is a line back to that house. Dominic was my son. He was the boy you pulled out of Somerville. Do not pretend you have forgotten what he was. He was my son, Marco." A long silence. "The Grecos," Marco continued, quieter. "Salvatore has been back in Boston for 2 months. I have it from 3 sources. He did not come back to retire, nephew. He came back because he has finished counting the children. He knows how many you have. He knows where they go to school. He is going to pick them off one at a time until there is nothing left of your long-term investment except funerals. Let him try. Let him try? Vincenzo, he just did." Another silence. Sophia held her breath against the door. Then Vincent's voice, and she had never heard it sound like this, low and absolutely finished. "Every child in this house is a promise. Uncle, I made that promise to myself, and I made it to people you never met. I will protect them until I am dead. And if I have to burn Providence to the ground to do it, then Providence will burn." She heard the clink of a glass being set down. She heard Marco sigh, long and tired, then start teaching them, "Vincenzo, because sooner or later, one of them is going to ask a question neither of us can answer." Sophia crept back up the stairs. She lay in her bed for a long time, staring into the dark. She was 13 years old, and for the first time in her life she understood that the 8 of them sleeping under this roof had never been ordinary children, and this had never been an ordinary house. They were targets. And somewhere in a city called Providence, a man named Salvatore Greco had just started counting. 5 years passed the way the city did after a bad winter. Not forgiven, simply covered over with new layers. Sophia was 18 now, and the acceptance letter from Harvard Law had arrived in a thick cream envelope that Elena had propped up on the breakfast table so that Vincent would see it before his first cup of espresso. When he opened it, he read it twice. Then he folded the letter neatly, placed it back into its envelope, walked upstairs, and shut the door to his study for 40 minutes. When he came out, his eyes were red. He did not explain why, and Elena did not ask. The Wednesday before Sophia was scheduled to move into Cambridge, Vincent called her into the library after dinner. A small velvet box sat in the center of the desk. He did not sit down. He did not invite her to. "Open it." Inside lay a silver ring, a simple band, matte finished, engraved with a single letter on the inner curve. M. Sophia turned it in the lamplight. She had seen a dozen versions of this ring on the fingers of the men who came through this house. None of them had ever been offered to a woman. "It is not the family ring," Vincent said, anticipating the question she had not yet asked. "The family ring is a weight you do not need. This one is only mine. I had it made the week you were born." She slid it onto her right hand. It fit perfectly. She realized he must have measured her finger in her sleep. "Listen to me, little one." His voice had the quiet finality he used when he gave orders no one argued with. "I cannot walk the halls of that school with you. I cannot sit in the back of your classrooms. But this ring is me. Wherever you go, Papa will find you. If you ever need to come home, you close your hand around it, and you say so, and I will be there before the sun comes up. Do you understand?" She nodded. Her throat had closed around something she could not name. He kissed her forehead. He did not hug her. Vincent Moretti did not hug anyone. 3 days later, she stood on the steps of Langdale Hall with a shoulder bag full of casebooks and a silver ring she could feel with every heartbeat, and she walked into the first morning of the rest of her life. At the coffee cart outside the library, on the third Tuesday of orientation, a man walking too fast with a stack of papers collided with her hard enough that the lid blew off her cup, and brown liquid bloomed across the front of her white shirt. God, I am so sorry, I am so sorry. She looked up. He was tall, perhaps 28, dark hair that needed a cut, the kind of easy handsomeness that did not seem aware of itself. His eyes were a very light gray. He was already pulling napkins from his jacket pocket, handing her a fresh cup he had just paid for, apologizing in complete sentences that somehow made her feel that he, and not she, was the one who had been inconvenienced. I am Adrian, he said. Adrian Cross. Law Review, 3rd year, currently the worst person at Harvard Law School. Sophia. Sophia what? Just Sophia. He smiled at that, as though he had received a small gift. Just Sophia it is. In the weeks that followed, Adrian appeared at the edges of her days with the ease of a person who had always been there. He saved her a seat in the reading room. He taught her how to navigate the citation software everyone else had pretended she already knew. He took her to a bookstore in Porter Square that sold poetry in 6 languages. He asked her about her favorite novels and listened to her answers with the slightly tilted attention of a man who was taking notes he would never write down. Crucially, he never once asked who her father was. In that small omission lived the first experience of her life as an ordinary girl. Her whole childhood had been a quiet negotiation, with the knowledge that every adult in a room already knew the answer before she spoke. Adrian Cross treated her as though she had walked into the world 5 minutes ago with nothing behind her. It was the most intoxicating feeling she had ever encountered. She did not notice the evening, 2 weeks in, when he stepped away from their corner table at Darwin's to take a phone call he said was about his dissertation. She did not notice that the call lasted only 60 seconds. She did not notice that before he put the phone away, he tapped the camera icon and reviewed 3 photographs he had taken of her that afternoon without her knowledge. A wide shot of her reading, a close shot of her profile, and one of her right hand resting on the table with a silver ring on the 3rd finger. He attached all 3 to a message and sent them to a number saved under no name at all. 200 miles south, in a restored brownstone on Federal Hill in Providence, a man with silver hair and a thin scar along his left jaw opened the text on his phone. Salvatore Greco was 55 years old that autumn. He had been waiting for this photograph since the night a servant in Beacon Hill had hidden a bundle behind a trash bin, and the young Moretti Don had chosen to walk into an alley instead of past it. Sal Greco studied Sophia's face in the photograph for a long time. Then he smiled. It was not a kind expression. 18 years, he said quietly to the empty room. 18 years I have waited, and at last the little bird has flown out of the nest. Adrian Cross was a patient man. His uncle had taught him that patience was the only skill that separated a soldier from a strategist, and Adrian had trained for this assignment the way other men trained for the bar exam. He never mentioned her father. Not once in the first month. He let her bring it up on her own terms, in small pieces, the way she probably had never done with anyone before. He learned that she called him Papa. He learned that she had 7 siblings. He learned that none of them shared a surname with her, and that Sophia did not know why, or pretended not to know why, and that the distinction between those 2 states was the crack through which he would eventually enter. In October, he began leaving breadcrumbs, a casual comment at dinner about a documentary he had half-watched on the Boston mob wars of the early 2000s, a book on organized crime history he left face down on the coffee table of his apartment when she came over to study, an offhand remark, in a conversation about criminal procedure, that the statute of limitations did not apply to murder, and some of the bodies buried in the North End had been buried a very long time ago. Sophia did not take the bait, but she also did not change the subject. Adrian noted this. He reported it up the chain. Sal Greco told him to slow down further. Fish, Sal said, did not swim toward hooks. They swam toward what looked like food. So Adrian switched tactics. He began to talk about his own family, an elaborate invention of a deceased father who had been, he said, a small-time accountant murdered in 1997 by people who had never been arrested. He told Sophia the story one night over a bottle of cheap red wine in his apartment. He let his voice break in the correct place. He watched her eyes soften and fill, and he knew, with the cold, clean certainty of a man closing a briefcase, that she had just decided he was the only person in the world who could understand her. 2 weeks later, he called her at 11 at night. "I found something," he said. His voice was shaking, a tremor he had practiced in front of a bathroom mirror. "Sophia, I was in the basement archives of Langdell. I was pulling old case files for Professor Abrams. There is a box. I think you need to see it. I think it is about your family." She came across Cambridge in the rain without a coat. The reading carrel in the basement smelled of mildew and old paper. Adrian had already laid the contents of the box across the table. He stepped back when she walked in, as though he had only barely beaten her to the discovery, as though he had not spent 3 days arranging each document to the exact angle. There were photographs first, a woman with dark hair and enormous blue eyes holding a newborn, a man beside her, Sophia's own cheekbones, Sophia's own jawline, staring into the camera with the wary pride of a new father. Behind them, a Christmas tree. On the back of one photograph, in an unfamiliar hand, 2 words and a date, the Belantes. December 2007. Sophia's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the wooden chair. Then the police report. Then the coroner's intake sheet. Then the typed internal memorandum on letterhead she did not recognize, describing a fire at a Beacon Hill property on Christmas Eve of 2007, listing the names of 11 dead, closing with a single paragraph that her eyes refused to process the first time and returned to on the second. Source within the Moretti organization confirms the attack was ordered and supervised personally by Vincenzo Moretti, newly installed capo of the family. No survivors recovered at scene. Infant female 3 weeks, named Sophia Belante, presumed deceased in structure. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a square of tissue paper, lay a small silver oval medallion on a broken chain. On its back, a single engraved letter, B. Sophia closed her fingers around it, and the memory came back to her all at once, clean and terrible, the way buried things came back. She was 5 years old. She was standing in the doorway of his study in her nightgown. He had turned toward her with something in his closed fist. He had opened his hand. A silver oval, a single letter, and then the sudden motion of his finger snapping shut again, and the rough stranger's sound in his voice when he told her to go back to bed. He had been holding her mother's necklace. He had been holding it the whole time. She became aware of Adrian's hand on her back. She had not felt him approach. He knelt beside her chair. He did not say the words, "I am sorry." He was better than that. He let the documents speak, the way Sal had taught him to. "Sophia," he whispered. "Sophia, listen to me. You have a choice to make." She could not look at him. She was looking at the photograph of her father, her real father, a man whose face she had never seen before this night, and whom she would now never be able to unsee. "You can close this box. You can walk back to that house on Louisburg Square and you can pretend none of this exists. You can live the rest of your life in his story. That is a choice. I will not judge you if you make it." He let that hang. "Or you can choose justice. For them." His fingertip tapped the photograph of the woman holding the infant. "For her. For the man whose last name should have been yours. You are the only one left, Sophia. There is no one else in the world who can speak for them. Only you." He was not watching her face. He was watching her right hand. The hand with the silver ring on it, the engraved M that he had photographed on a cafe table on the 3rd Tuesday of orientation. She turned toward the small rectangular window at the end of the carrel. Rain ran down the glass. The lamp across the alley threw its light in sideways streaks. Her eyes had been wet a moment ago. They were not wet anymore. They had gone very still, and very cold, and very blue, and somewhere deep behind them, something that had been sleeping for 18 years finally opened its eyes. "Justice," she said. Her voice did not shake. Sophia came home for Christmas exactly as she had for every one of the 18 winters before it, and not a single detail of her arrival betrayed that she was no longer the same person who had left. She wore the cashmere coat Vincent had bought her before orientation. She kissed Elena on both cheeks at the service door. She teased Luca about the beard he was attempting to grow. She helped Isabella string the cranberry garland that their father insisted on hanging the same way every year, the way his own mother had once hung it in a different house during a war none of them remembered. When Matteo knocked over a glass ornament, Sophia was the first to kneel and help him sweep up the pieces, and she laughed at exactly the right moment, and she looked him in the eye with exactly the right warmth. Adrian had prepared her for this. "Do not become a different person," he had said. "Become a slightly better version of the daughter he already believes you are. He will not look for a snake. He will look for a rival. Give him nothing to compare." Vincent was too careful a man to be deceived entirely. On the second evening, over espresso in the sunroom, he set down his cup and studied her with the quiet, unblinking attention he had once used on men across a negotiating table. "Daughter, Papa, something is different with you. She met his eyes. She had rehearsed this. The first semester was harder than I thought it would be. Papa. I came in thinking I already knew how to write. Turns out I knew how to sound like I knew. It has been a lesson in humility. That is all. He watched her for another long moment. Then he picked up his cup again and sipped. Humility, he said, is the most expensive thing they teach at that school. Do not let them charge you twice for it. She smiled. He smiled back, barely, the way he smiled at nothing else in the world, and she felt, for one terrible instant, the old gravity of him pulling at her, the 5-year-old self still alive somewhere inside her ribcage, screaming that this was a man who had read to her through a fever at 7, who had stood at the back of her middle school debate finals so she would not be distracted by seeing him, who had cried exactly 1 tear at her brother's grave and trusted her alone to witness it. She crushed that self silent. She held the ring on her right hand, steady beneath the table. She reminded herself, the way Adrian had taught her, of the photograph. The Belantes, December 2007. She kept smiling. The house went quiet just after 2 in the morning. Sophia waited another full hour in her bed, counting breaths, listening to the hum of the boiler cycle off twice. Then she rose. She did not turn on the light. She walked in stocking feet down the service stair she had discovered as a child of 9. Past the kitchen, down the long carpeted corridor to the study door. She had watched him enter the combination 100 times without meaning to. A child absorbed those things the way a sponge absorbed water. She turned the dial left, right, left. The safe opened on the first try. Inside, she found 3 things. A leather-bound ledger, small and well-thumbed. She turned to the first page. 12 names were written in Vincent's precise handwriting, each paired with a date, a city, and a second name, in parentheses, a surname she did not always recognize. Dominic, 2006, Somerville, Russo. Isabella, July 2006, Chelsea, Viotti. Luca, 2007, Boston, Cavalli. Sophia, 2007, Boston, Boston. Her own entry did not have a parenthesis, only a single word, Belante. A sealed cream envelope sat behind the ledger. Across the front, in the same hand, was written, "To be opened only upon my death, V." And behind the envelope, resting on a square of black velvet, the silver medallion, the letter B catching the low light. Her hands did not shake. Adrian had warned her about shaking hands. She took out her phone. She photographed each page of the ledger. She photographed the envelope's seal. She photographed the medallion front and back. The flash was off. The room stayed dark. Her breathing stayed even. She returned each item to its exact position. She closed the safe. She spun the dial. She walked back upstairs. In her bedroom, she sent the photographs to a contact saved under the name of a Harvard study partner who did not exist. 3 ticks on the screen. Delivered. Seen. A single heart in reply, followed by 3 words. Brave girl. Home tomorrow. She deleted the conversation. She slid the phone under her pillow. She lay on her back in the dark and listened to the wind against the window, and she did not cry, because she had finished crying in a basement archive in Cambridge 4 weeks ago. What she did not know, as she stared at the ceiling, was that a small green light had been pulsing behind a decorative clock on the study wall the entire time she had knelt in front of the safe. What she did not know was that the feed from that camera did not route to Vincent's phone. It routed to one other device in the house. A silver laptop open at that moment on a desk in a guest suite at the far end of the East Wing, where Marco Moretti had been staying for the holiday, and where he had just finished watching his grandniece photograph the contents of his nephew's safe. Marco watched the clip a second time. He watched her hands. He watched her face. He watched the precision of her movements and the total absence of hesitation. Then he picked up a burner phone from the desk drawer. He pressed a single saved number. When the line connected, he did not say hello. "I knew this girl was going to be the problem," he said quietly. "The moment he pulled her out of that snow, I knew. Well, the time has come." He listened for a moment. He nodded once. "Good," he said. "Then we begin." He closed the phone and watched the security feed loop again, and the smile that touched the corner of his mouth was the smile of a man who had been waiting 18 years for a door to finally open. Adrian drove her down to Providence on the 2nd Saturday in January, on a road slick with black ice and a sky the color of ash. He had told her they were going to meet an old friend of her father's, her real father, a man who had tried to warn the Belantes about the Moretti attack and had arrived too late, a man who had spent the last 18 years grieving the family he had failed to save, and who had been watching over Sophia from a distance ever since, waiting until she was old enough to know the truth. Adrian told her the story with the cadence of a man reading scripture, and Sophia, who had spent the past month learning to doubt everything Vincent had ever said to her, did not think to apply the same doubt to anyone else. The brownstone on Federal Hill had green shutters and a small stone lion on each side of the front step. A woman in her 60s opened the door, smiled at Sophia as though she had been waiting her whole life for this visit, and led her to a sitting room where a fire had been lit but no one sat near it. Salvatore Greco rose from a chair by the window. He was taller than she had expected, elegant in a dark wool sweater and gray slacks, his silver hair swept back from a face that wore its years well. He did not approach her. He stood at a careful distance, the way a man stands when he wants someone to feel she has control of the room. "Sophia," he said softly. His voice cracked slightly on the second syllable, and she thought, at the time, that this was grief finally released. "You look exactly like your mother." He crossed the room slowly. He took both of her hands in his. His palms were dry and very warm. "Antonio," he whispered. "Your father. He was my friend, Sophia. He was my brother in everything but blood. The night they died, I was on a plane back from Rome. I landed at Logan at dawn and I drove to that house. And when I saw what Moretti had done, I sat on the curb across the street and I wept until a policeman asked me to move along." He closed his eyes. "I have waited 18 years to say these words to you. I am sorry. I am sorry I did not get there in time." Sophia felt her composure crack at the seams. She had not expected this. She had prepared herself for an ally. She had not prepared herself for grief that felt exactly like her own. Sal led her to a chair. The woman brought tea. He did not rush her. He let her cry. And when she had finished, he spoke to her for the next 2 hours, in the quiet, steady voice of a man walking a traumatized animal out of a burning stable. He told her the Belante name had been a good name, that Antonio had refused to do certain kinds of work that Vincent had wanted done, that Vincent had invented a story about betrayal as a pretext for erasure, that the attack had been a message to every family in Boston about what would happen to those who said no to the Morettis. Every word Sal spoke flowed over the wound Adrian had opened in the Harvard basement and seemed to seal itself there as truth. Then, near the end, with the careful reluctance of a surgeon, he introduced the price. "I can give you justice, Sophia. But I cannot walk into that house. I cannot sit across from that man and survive it. I am only one old friend of your father's. What I need, what your parents need, is someone on the inside, someone he trusts." She understood. She made him say it anyway. "What do you need?" "His schedule. When he leaves the house, which cars he uses, which routes he takes, the combination to the safe in his study, and, Sophia," he hesitated, the way a man hesitates before handing a patient a difficult diagnosis. "The ledger, the names, the other children." Something inside her tightened. "The other children are not part of this. Sophia." Sal leaned forward. His eyes were sad and very kind. "Those children are not your family. I know he has made you believe they are. He has made all of them believe it. They are his insurance policy. They are the mouthpieces he plans to use in 20 years to launder his empire into legitimacy. Do you understand what he did? He did not save them. He collected them. He pulled them out of houses he himself had condemned. Every one of them has a gravestone somewhere with a family name on it, and he is the reason." She stared at the fire. She thought of Isabella stringing cranberries at the dining table, of Luca at 15, lanky and serious, explaining a math problem to her at the kitchen counter, of Matteo, 7 years old, falling asleep in her lap during a movie on Christmas Eve only 3 nights ago. She thought of the ledger, the parenthesized surnames, the entries dated before her own. Vincent had been collecting children for 2 years before she was born. The thought was colder than the river she had crossed to get here. "All right," she said. Sal nodded, a slow, weighted nod, the way a confessor nods when absolution has been accepted. "You are your father's daughter, Sophia Belante. Antonio would be proud tonight." Adrian drove her home in silence. She did not speak the entire length of Route 95. She stared out the window at the snow and the oil refineries and the dark harbor. When they reached her dormitory in Cambridge, he kissed her forehead the way a man kisses a soldier before a long march. In her room, she locked the door. She walked to the small mirror above her dresser. She looked at the girl in the glass. She did not recognize her entirely, and that was all right, because the girl she had been had died in a library basement, and she had not yet named the woman who stood in her place. She looked down at her right hand. The silver ring glinted in the lamplight. "M. Moretti, wherever you go, Papa will find you." She slid the ring slowly off her finger, She placed it inside a small cedar box on her dresser, the kind used for jewelry a girl no longer wears. She closed the lid. She did not weep. She did not hesitate. She turned off the light. Note: the outline for this section includes a naming conflict. The youngest boy is listed as Marco, which duplicates the uncle's name. For clarity, I've renamed the 8-year-old boy Matteo, already established as one of the 8 children in Part 4, keeping Chiara as the 10-year-old girl. A month later, Sofia came home for Vincent's birthday. The Moretti family did not celebrate birthdays the way other families did. There was no cake with his age written in frosting, no crowd of men in suits raising glasses in the foyer. There were only the 9 of them at the long oak table in the dining room. Elena serving the osso buco. Vincent had been eating on his birthday since he was 6 years old, and an unlit candle in a small brass holder at his place setting that he would blow out at midnight, alone, the way he always did. It was the one night of the year, the dawn of the North End, allowed himself to be only a man in a house with his children. Sofia sat 3 chairs down from him. She laughed at the right moments. She complimented Elena's sauce. She ate exactly enough to be unremarkable. Vincent watched her throughout the meal without appearing to watch her. He did not ask what was wrong. He had begun to feel something cold in her across the table on Christmas, and in the weeks since he had decided, after long consideration, that 18-year-old girls were permitted the occasional distance from their fathers without requiring an interrogation. He would wait. He was a patient man. He believed, as he had always believed, that patience with the children in his house was the one luxury his name could afford him. After dinner, Isabella found her in the hallway outside the powder room. She was 19 now, her copper hair cut shorter than the last time Sofia had seen her, her eyes the same warm brown they had always been. She caught Sofia by both hands and pulled her into an embrace before Sofia could construct any defense against it. "I missed you, Sorella," Isabella whispered into her hair. "Harvard is too far. You tell Papa that. He worries about you every single day. Every time a car drives past the house at night, he walks to the window to check. Do you know that? You did not see it. But he did that all through Christmas. Every night, after you were asleep." Sofia could not answer. She bit the inside of her lower lip until she tasted iron. She did not trust her voice for several seconds. "I missed you too, Bella," she managed. Isabella squeezed her hands and went back to the dining room. Sofia stood alone in the hallway. She looked at her watch. It was 11:51. At 11:58, she slipped out through the servants' corridor, down the back stair, and into the utility vestibule that opened onto the side garden. She disengaged the deadbolt. She turned off the alarm zone for the east perimeter. She opened the door 2 inches and wedged a folded cocktail napkin into the frame so that it would not lock behind her. She walked back upstairs. She sat down at the table in time to watch Vincent blow out the single candle at the stroke of midnight. His eyes found hers across the flame as it went out, and he smiled at her, a small, private smile, the smile of a man who was 44 years old tonight and who still counted himself lucky. The first gunshot came at 12:07. It sounded like a dropped plate in another room, and for a fraction of a second everyone at the table looked toward the kitchen. Then the second and third shots came, closer, and the window of the front parlor exploded inward, and the world went white with noise. Vincent moved before anyone else had processed what was happening. He was on his feet, overturning the table with a single motion so that the heavy oak became a shield between his children and the front of the house. His gun was already in his hand. Sofia had never seen him draw it inside the house. She had not known he carried one to dinner. Basement. Now. Andate, andate. Elena was already herding the younger children toward the kitchen stair. Luca grabbed Raphael under one arm and Gianni under the other. Isabella took Chiara's hand and reached back for Matteo, the 8-year-old, who had frozen in place beside the overturned chair. The second wave of shooters came in through the east garden door. Through the door Sofia had unbolted 90 minutes ago. She saw them pour into the corridor like black water. She saw Matteo turn at the sound, his small face confused more than afraid, and she saw the muzzle flash from the hallway reach him before Isabella could pull him backward. The little boy crumpled without a sound. Chiara, 10 years old, was hit a second later, a stray round that came through the dining room wall and caught her in the side as she ran. Sofia did not scream. Her throat had closed. Vincent roared. There was no other word for the sound that came out of him. He stepped into the corridor firing, and she watched her father, the iceberg, the coldest man in Boston, fight with the blind, holy fury of a parent. He took a round in the shoulder. He did not slow. Tony Ricci came down the front stairs firing a shotgun. 3 more men she did not recognize appeared from the kitchen. Within 90 seconds, the attackers were dead on the hallway floor or retreating back through the garden, and the house was filled with the smell of gunpowder and the high, thin sound of Chiara whimpering in Isabella's arms. And Matteo lay alone on the dining room floor where he had fallen. Vincent walked to him. His right shoulder was black with his own blood. He did not seem to notice. He knelt. He gathered the 8-year-old into his arms. He pressed the boy's face against his chest and rocked, very slowly, the way he had rocked him in a basement room 11 years ago when the child was 2 and frightened of thunder. Vincent Moretti began to cry. Sophia saw it from the shadow of the corridor where she had not moved. Real tears, the kind that come from a place no man wants anyone to know he has. They ran down the face of the man who had raised her. They fell onto the hair of a boy she herself had opened the door for someone to kill. Her right hand, the one that no longer wore a silver ring, began to tremble so violently she had to press it against the wall to make it stop. She slid down the wall into a crouch. She watched the father she had betrayed hold the body of a son she had murdered, and she understood, in a single white instant, that there was no version of this story in which she would ever be forgiven. Not by him, not by herself. Author's note on continuity. Elena's retirement is introduced in this section as an event that occurred at some point between Sophia's childhood and the present. In the final compiled manuscript, a brief reference to her departure can be inserted into part 6 or 7 for smoother continuity. Moving forward. Sophia did not remember the drive back to Cambridge. She remembered the cold iron taste in her mouth. She remembered the windshield wipers cutting lines across the black road. She remembered pulling into the parking lot behind her dormitory and sitting in the driver's seat for 40 minutes with her hands locked on the wheel, unable to command her fingers to release. When she finally reached her room, she did not turn on the light. She lay on her bed fully dressed, in the coat she had worn to her father's birthday dinner, and stared at the ceiling until the sky outside went from black to gray to a sick, bruised white. She did not eat the next day. She did not sleep. She did not attend her seminar on constitutional procedure. Her phone rang once, a Boston number she did not recognize, and she was afraid to answer it. She was afraid of every number now. On the second day she called Adrian. It rang 4 times and went to an automated voicemail. The recorded greeting was a generic carrier message, not his voice. She called again. The same thing. She called a 3rd time, and on the 3rd attempt a 3-tone error chimed in her ear, followed by a polite computer voice. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. She sat on the edge of her bed. She called the number Sal Greco had given her, the one she had been told to use only in emergencies. It rang once. It rang again. And then the same chime, the same polite voice. The understanding arrived slowly, the way ice cracks on a lake in spring. First the hairline fractures, then the deeper ones, then the whole surface giving way at once. They were gone, both of them. The man who had kissed her forehead on the steps of her dormitory, and the man who had held her hands in his warm palms and called her Antonio's daughter. They had used her. They had pointed her at the house that had raised her like a weapon, and when the weapon had discharged, they had simply dropped it in the snow and walked away. She had opened a door for murderers. She had done it for 2 lies. She did not know how long she sat there. She only knew that at some point she looked at the cedar box on her dresser, and she walked to it, and she lifted the lid. The silver ring still lay on its small velvet cushion where she had left it. The engraved M was dulled by the dim winter light from the window. She did not put it back on. She did not yet feel she had the right, but she closed her hand around it in her pocket, and she walked out of the dormitory, and she got back into her car. There was one person left in the world who might tell her the truth. Not a version of it, not a sculpted version designed to move her like a chess piece. The real thing. Elena Rossi had retired the summer before Sophia's senior year of high school. Her knees had finally given out on the townhouse stairs, and Vincent had bought her a small clapboard cottage in Arlington, on a quiet street lined with maples, as a gift that she had accepted only because refusing it would have offended him more than accepting it. Sophia had visited twice. She remembered the address. The drive took 40 minutes. The streets in Arlington were still lined with old snow pushed into dirty berms along the curb. The cottage had a low picket fence and a wreath on the door that had been there since December. Sophia rang the bell. Elena opened the door wearing a gray cardigan over a blue housedress, her hair in the same tight knot she had worn since Sophia was an infant. She took one look at the girl on her step, the raw eyes, the unwashed hair, the coat that had not been changed in 2 days, and her face did something complicated. She did not look surprised. She looked tired, in a very specific way, the way people look tired when a thing they have dreaded for a long time has finally arrived. And they are relieved, at last, to have stopped waiting. "Little one," she said softly. Sophia's face collapsed. She stood on the concrete step and she wept. The way a small child weeps, the way she had not wept since she was 3 years old and had fallen on the gravel driveway, and Elena had picked her up without a word and carried her to the kitchen and put honey on the scrape. Elena did not ask her anything. She only stepped aside and held the door. "Come in," she said. "I have been expecting you." Sophia sat at the small kitchen table while Elena put a kettle on. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. A clock ticked on the wall above the stove. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Elena poured the tea into 2 plain white cups. She sat down across from Sophia and wrapped both of her thin hands around her own cup, as though it were a candle she was sheltering from a draft. She looked at Sophia for a long moment. "You want to know the truth, little one?" she said quietly. "The real truth. The one I have been carrying for you for 18 years? Sophia nodded. She could not speak. Elena closed her eyes for a breath. When she opened them again, they were steady. "Then listen to me carefully. And do not interrupt, because once I begin, I cannot stop until I am finished. And when I am finished, nothing in your life will ever be the same again." Elena set down her tea. She folded her hands on the table. She began. "On the afternoon of December 24th, 2007, a priest from St. Leonard's in the North End came to the townhouse on Louisburg Square. He had news that had traveled the long way around, through confessionals and kitchen doors and a cousin of a cousin. He told your papa that the Bellante family had been slaughtered in their own home 2 hours earlier. That is the truth, little one. Vincent did not order that attack. He did not even know it was coming." Sophia opened her mouth. Elena lifted one finger. "I told you not to interrupt." Sophia closed her mouth. "The attack was the work of Salvatore Greco. He had wanted the Bellante territories for a decade. He had waited for your father's father, the old Don, to die. 3 weeks after the funeral, with a young Don on the chair and the family still bleeding, Sal moved. But he was clever, little one. He was always clever. Before he struck, he made sure that a rumor reached Vincenzo through 3 trusted sources. A rumor that the Bellantes had been selling Moretti secrets to Providence. A rumor with names, dates, amounts. A rumor designed to be believed." Elena paused. She looked out the kitchen window, at the dirty snow piled along the fence. Vincent believed it. He was 26 years old. He had just buried his father. He made the call that a newly crowned Don in a bleeding family believes he is supposed to make. He gave the order. And by the time his crew arrived at the house on Beacon Hill that night, there was no one left for them to kill. Sal Greco had gotten there 2 hours earlier. Antonio, your mother, your grandmother, the cook, the driver, all of them were already cooling on the floors of the rooms they had been cleaning for Christmas Eve supper. Sophia's hands had begun to shake around her tea. Vincent understood within 5 minutes of walking through that front door. The coroners would later call it a professional job, but Vincent knew the signatures of professionals, and he knew the ones he employed. These were not Moretti. These were Greco shooters who had dressed as Moretti, who had left Moretti shell casings, who had fired Moretti weapons traced to Moretti warehouses. The attack had been designed to look like his work. He had been a puppet whose strings had been pulled from Providence. Elena's voice was very steady. She had rehearsed this story inside her head for a very long time. He ordered the crew to burn the house, not to cover the murders, little one. Those would never be covered. He burned it because he did not want anyone to know a second attack had preceded his. Because if the Moretti capos learned that the Greco had moved first and made fools of them, the war that would follow would have drowned this city. He took the shame of Sal's work onto his own name. He accepted the story the world would tell about him. And then he walked out of that house, and he heard a sound in an alley, and he found you. Sophia began to cry. "The medallion, little one, it was around your mother's neck when they killed her. Vincent took it from her body before he left the house. He has kept it in that safe for 18 years, not as a trophy, as a debt, as a thing he promised himself he would one day be permitted to give back to you if the right moment ever came, which it never did. The envelope," Sophia whispered. "I do not know what is in the envelope. I know only that he wrote it the week after he brought you home, and he has replaced it every few years with a new one as your life has grown. It is his confession. It is his will. It is the thing he hoped you would not read until he was gone, and the danger had passed with him." Elena stood. Her knees cracked audibly as she did. She walked to a small writing desk beneath the window and unlocked the top drawer with a key she wore on a chain around her neck. She returned to the table with a single folded letter that had yellowed at the edges. "Vincent gave me this 11 years ago," she said. "He told me that if the day ever came, if you ever came to me, I was to give it to you. He said I would know it was time." She placed the letter in front of Sophia and sat back down. Sophia unfolded it with numb fingers. The handwriting was his. She would have known it on the other side of the world. If Sophia has come to you, then she has learned something she was never meant to learn, and I have failed to protect her from it. Tell her this. I did not keep her for investment. I did not keep her for insurance. I kept her because I owed her father my life. Antonio Belante pulled me out of a kitchen in the North End on a summer afternoon in 1985, when I was 6 years old and my mother had just been shot in front of me. The men who came for her would have killed me too. Antonio was 14. He was the grocer's son from 2 doors down. He carried me 3 blocks on his back before he let me cry. He never told anyone. He never asked for anything. When I heard on Christmas Eve what had happened to his house, the first thing I thought was not of territory or war. It was of the boy who had carried me, and when I found his daughter in that alley, I understood that God had been waiting 18 years to let me carry her back. Sophia's hand fell open. The letter drifted to the table. She lowered her forehead to the wood and she wept, and Elena did not touch her, because Elena had learned, across a lifetime in the Moretti house, that some kinds of grief were not meant to be interrupted. Outside, a car drove slowly past the cottage, its snow tires crunching. Neither of them heard it. Sophia drove back to Cambridge in a fog she would not have been able to describe afterward. She did not remember merging onto the Massachusetts Turnpike. She did not remember paying the toll. She remembered only the sound of Elena's voice repeating inside her skull, the specific cadence of a sentence that had never been spoken aloud in her hearing before tonight. Antonio Belante pulled me out of a kitchen in the North End on a summer afternoon in 1985. She parked the car crookedly across 2 spaces behind her dormitory. She did not care. She climbed the stairs to her room 2 at a time. She locked the door behind her. She opened her laptop on the small desk by the window. Her fingers were clumsy on the keys. She typed 3 words into the search bar. Belante, Boston, fire. The results came up in rows, and Sophia forced herself to read slowly, because a trained lawyer, even an apprentice one, did not read panicked. The Boston Globe Archive from December 26, 2007. An obituary column. A follow-up piece 3 months later, investigative, by a reporter who had since left journalism for a public relations firm. Names of witnesses. A building inspector's preliminary report describing ignition points that had been, even at the time, inconsistent with electrical failure. A short paragraph, buried, noting that several forensic details of the scene suggested a coordinated assault rather than a household fire. The reporter had been killed in a hit-and-run in Quincy 4 months after that article ran. Every detail aligned with what Elena had told her. Not a word was missing. Not a word had been added. She typed the next name with trembling fingers. Adrian Cross, Harvard. The first hit was a legitimate listing on the Harvard Law Directory. He was real. He did exist. She scrolled past it. A LinkedIn profile confirmed the same. She scrolled past that as well, into the 2nd and 3rd pages, where the algorithms stopped being polite. An alumni magazine from Brown University, 2019. A fundraising dinner in Providence. A photograph of a young man standing beside an older man at a podium. The caption identified the older man as Salvatore Greco, Providence businessman and philanthropist. It identified the younger man as his nephew, Adrian Cross Greco, recipient of the Family Foundation's annual law scholarship. Adrian had dropped the second surname the moment he transferred to Cambridge. Sophia stared at the photograph for a full minute. She did not blink. Her hand reached, without consultation from her brain, toward the cedar box on the dresser. She lifted the lid. She took out the silver ring. She closed her fist around it, harder than she had meant to. The engraved inner edge bit into her palm. She did not loosen her grip. She squeezed tighter, as though by pain she could force her body to wake up and prove that the last month of her life had been a dream. Warm wetness ran along her lifeline. When she finally opened her hand, the M on the band had left a faint impression in bruised pink, and a thin bead of blood traced the curve of her finger. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A number she did not recognize, the same area code as Providence. She answered without speaking. Sophia. The voice was soft and warm, the way a grandfather speaks to a child who has fallen asleep on his shoulder. Sophia, little one, are you there? Her throat worked. She forced the word out. You. It is me, Salvatore Greco said gently. Now, do not be upset. You did very well. The raid on Christmas was regrettable, yes. Some of the younger ones were lost. That was not my intention. My men are not trained surgeons, but the information you provided has opened doors for us that have been locked for 18 years, and for that, I will always be grateful to you. You killed my parents. A pause. Then, without any apparent regret, a small, dry laugh. Yes, I did, and I would do it again, for the same reasons. Your father was a stubborn man, Sophia. Your mother was worse. They were going to ruin a great deal of business that I had spent my life building. I am sorry you were in the house that night. That was not by design. That was a mistake my men made. You were not supposed to be left alive. She closed her eyes. She could not breathe. But here is the situation, little one. You are now, officially, a loose end. You know my face. You know my voice. You know the nephew I raised. You are, at this moment, the single largest liability Vincent Moretti has ever owned, and the single largest liability I have ever owned. And so we find ourselves with a problem. You have two options. You can continue to work for me, quietly, cleanly, for the rest of your natural life. Or you can disappear. Tonight, I have men in Cambridge. They are very close to your building. Choose wisely. She did not think. She heard herself speak. Vincent will kill you. Oh, no, little one. Sal's voice went soft with pleasure. Vincent will not kill anyone. Vincent will be dead before the sun comes up. I have my men at the Boston Harbor warehouse tonight where he is holding his capos meeting. You were kind enough to send us his schedule, and his guards, and his rotation. Thank you, Sophia. You have been the most useful gift anyone has ever given me. The line went silent. Sophia dropped the phone. Then she picked it up again. She scrambled through her contacts with slippery fingers. She pressed the top entry. Papa. It rang. It rang again. It rang a third time. It went to the automated voicemail that Vincent had recorded in his own voice 4 years ago. A terse, 7-word greeting in his unmistakable low baritone. You have reached Vincent. Leave it short, she called again. Same ring, same voicemail, same voice. She was out of her chair before the line disconnected. She grabbed her keys. She did not put on her coat. She did not close the laptop. She ran down the stairwell 3 steps at a time, her fist still closed around the silver ring with the letter M, and the blood from her palm leaving small red prints on the metal railing as she went. Author's note. The outline specifies an overnight flight from Cambridge to Boston. Since Cambridge and Boston are adjacent cities, roughly 20 minutes by car, I've adapted the sequence to match geographical reality. Sophia drives directly from her dormitory. This preserves the urgency of the outline without breaking plausibility. Sophia tore across the Charles River with the car's needle past 90, the dashboard clock reading 12:47 in the morning, the ring still clenched in her bloody fist against the steering wheel. She did not call the police. Police did not enter Moretti business. Police did not go to Moretti warehouses. If Vincent was inside that building and Sal Greco's men were already there, a squad car pulling up with its lights on would only mean 24 funerals instead of 1. She understood this the way the children of soldiers understand the specific rules of military bases. Some knowledge you do not learn. It is grown into you. She took the exit for Beacon Hill because it was the only move she could think of. If Vincent was not reachable by phone, then the house might know something the phone did not. Someone was always at the townhouse. Someone always answered the door. She pulled into the circular drive on Louisburg Square with 2 wheels on the curb. She left the engine running. She ran up the steps and hit the buzzer with the heel of her hand. The door opened almost immediately. Isabella stood in the entryway in a dark sweater and jeans, her copper hair tied back, a cordless phone clenched in her right hand and a small black pistol in her left. Sophia had not known her sister owned a gun. She had not known a great many things. Isabella did not greet her. Isabella looked at her the way a surgeon looks at a tumor. Papa is at the harbor warehouse, she said flatly. The East Pier. He took the meeting at 11. He has not checked in for the 9 o'clock call or the midnight call. That is 2 missed rotations. Tony has sent men. Nobody has come back. Bella, listen to me. No. The word hit Sophia like a slap. She stopped speaking. Isabella stepped forward. Her voice was low and perfectly controlled, and somewhere underneath it, a terrible young fury had been built from 19 years of love turning to stone in a single week. Do you think we did not know, Sophia? Do you think any of us are so stupid? She held up the cordless phone. Uncle Marco pulled the security footage from the study on Christmas. He sat me and Luca down 3 weeks ago and he showed us. The safe, your face, your hands, every photograph you took, every file you opened. We have known for almost a month. Sophia's mouth moved. No sound came out. We did not tell Papa. Do you understand why we did not tell Papa? Because we love him. Because knowing would have broken him in a way no Greco bullet ever could. Luca thought we should cut you off completely. Matteo cried when I explained it to him. Matteo? Sophia? 8 years old. He cried because he could not understand why his big sister would open a door to men with guns. Her voice finally cracked on the last word. and she did not forgive it. Well, he is not crying anymore. Mateo is in the basement of a funeral home on Hanover Street. He has been there for 1 week, and he will be buried tomorrow morning, and you will not be at the service. You have lost the right. Sophia could not see. Tears had flooded her eyes, and she did not wipe them away. Bella, please, I did not know. I thought I had a file. I had photographs. I had a man who said he was Papa's friend. You had Papa. Isabella's voice finally broke its leash. You had him every night of your entire life. You had a man who taught you to read. You had a man who drove 40 miles to every single debate you ever had in middle school and then pretended he hadn't been there so you could win without feeling watched. You had a house. You had 7 siblings. You had the only family any of us will ever have. And someone showed you a piece of paper in a library and you chose the paper. You chose the paper, Sophia. The words landed one at a time, like individual bullets. Sophia sank to her knees on the marble floor. Her bloody fist fell open in her lap. The silver ring rolled onto the tile with a small, bright sound. Isabella looked at it. For a long moment she did not move. Then, slowly, something shifted behind her eyes. Not forgiveness, something harder. Something that had the cold practicality Sophia had seen 1,000 times on the face of the man who had raised them both. Isabella reached into her jeans pocket. She pulled out a car key fob. She dropped it onto the floor beside the ring. That is the key to Papa's black SUV in the garage. There is a .38 in the glove compartment. It is loaded. I assume, after 4 summers at the shooting range, you still remember how to use it. Sophia looked up at her sister through tears. Bella, do not speak to me. Isabella's voice was absolutely level again. Get up. Drive to the East Pier. If you reach our father before the Greco finishes him, maybe you still belong to this family. If you do not reach him, or if you reach him and you cannot do what needs to be done, then do not come back to this house. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Do you understand me? Sophia nodded. She could not speak. Pick up the ring. Sophia picked it up. She did not try to put it on. She did not feel she had earned it back. She simply closed her fist around it again, and she reached for the key fob, and she stood. Isabella opened the front door. As Sophia passed through it, Isabella spoke once more, quieter this time, almost to herself. Papa always said you were the smartest of us. Prove him right one more time. That is all I am asking. Sophia stumbled down the steps. She climbed into the black SUV. She started the engine. She pulled out of Louisburg Square, going east. The streets of Boston unfolded in front of her in the blue midnight light. And as she drove, her mind betrayed her the only way it knew how. Memory ambushed her at every stoplight. Vincent reading her Little Red Riding Hood at 5. Vincent at the back of the Milton Auditorium at 12, pretending to check his watch so she would not see him crying during her speech. Vincent kneeling in her doorway at 13, both hands on her shoulders, saying Dominic the way she would remember for the rest of her life. Vincent standing at the stove at 4 in the morning after her first heartbreak at 16, making her hot chocolate without asking, because he had learned, across 18 years, the exact silences that her sadness produced. Her father, her father, her father. She pressed the accelerator harder, and the street lamps of Atlantic Avenue streamed past the windshield like falling stars, and somewhere ahead, on a dark pier beside a black harbor, a man she had tried to kill was fighting to stay alive long enough for her to reach him. The East Pier of the Port of Boston lay at the end of a service road most cab drivers did not know existed. Sophia killed her headlights a quarter-mile out. She rolled the black SUV past stacked containers until the shape of Warehouse 7 rose out of the dark like a sleeping animal. She opened the glove compartment. The .38 was there, exactly where Isabella had said it would be. She checked the cylinder the way Vincent had taught her at the range when she was 14. 6 rounds. The wind off the harbor knifed through her thin sweater as she stepped out of the vehicle. Somewhere over the water, a foghorn moaned once and went silent. Then she heard it. The flat, percussive thud of gunfire from inside the warehouse. 2 bursts. A pause. 3 more shots. She ran. The side access door had been kicked open. A man in a dark jacket lay across the threshold, face down, a pool of blood spreading beneath his shoulder. One of Tony's men. She stepped over him. The interior of the warehouse was cavernous, lit only by industrial overheads at the far end. Pallets of olive oil drums stacked 40 feet high. And behind these, Sophia crouched, the .38 cold in her grip, her heart loud enough to give her away. She found a gap between 2 drums and looked through. Her Uncle Marco lay face down near the center of the floor, a dark stain spreading from beneath his shoulder in a patient halo. He was not moving. Beyond him, 5 Moretti capos, dead, men whose faces she had known since she was a child. Vincent stood at the far end with his back to a steel column. Blood soaked the left shoulder of his white shirt. A fresh red line ran down his jaw. He held a gun in each hand. 2 men in charcoal overcoats flanked him with pistols raised. Tony Ricci lay at his feet, barely breathing. Footsteps echoed from the main entrance. Sal Greco walked into the light. He did not hurry. He carried no weapon. His silver hair was combed the same careful way he had worn it the afternoon he had taken her hands in Providence. He stopped at a comfortable distance from Vincent and spread his palms open, the way old friends greet each other. Vincenzo. Vincent did not speak. 18 years. Sal's voice carried in the empty space. My father swore on his deathbed that the Moretti name would not outlive his grandchildren. I promised him I would see to it. I am a man who keeps promises to his father. You, of all people, should understand that. Vincent wiped blood from his jaw with the back of his left hand. Is that all you brought tonight, Salvatore? 3 shooters and a speech? Or did you want to parade your little spy out here too? Sal laughed. It was a warm laugh. An uncle's laugh. The worst sound Sophia had ever heard. Oh, Vincenzo, the poor girl. She has been dead since the moment she believed I was her ally. She opened the doors I needed opened. She photographed the ledger I needed photographed. She walked the exact path I drew for her. And now 2 of my men are driving to her dormitory in Cambridge. The smile faded from his mouth. She will die believing you were the monster I told her you were. That is the part of this I have been looking forward to the most. Behind the olive oil drums, Sophia's hand closed around the .38 so hard her knuckles went white. She did not weep. Something inside her that had been shaking for a week finally stopped. She lifted the gun. 6 rounds. 4 men in the circle of light. She stepped out from behind the crates. The first shot took the gunman on the left through the neck, before he had finished turning toward the sound of her footsteps. The second caught the one on the right in the chest as he was still raising his pistol. Both men went down inside the same 2 seconds. Sophia kept walking. She did not stop until she was inside the lit circle, the .38 steady at shoulder height, 4 rounds remaining, her face streaked with tears. Vincent saw her. For an instant, the man who had held a ring of guns for 20 years simply stopped. His own weapons lowered half an inch. His mouth opened around a word he could not form. Sophia. His voice was a rasp. What are you doing here? Before she could answer, Sal Greco turned, hands already rising the way a man raises them when caught mid-sentence. Oh, little one, he clicked his tongue softly. Have you come to rescue the man you tried to have killed last week? That is a very long drive to make, just to change your mind. Sophia's face twisted. Papa. She did not look at Sal. Papa, I am sorry. I am so sorry. I did not know. I thought. Her voice broke. Vincent looked at her. She waited for the anger. She had prepared herself for it the whole drive from Louisburg Square. She had decided she deserved it. The anger did not come. What came instead was the worst thing she had ever seen on her father's face. Not fury. Not betrayal. Only pain. The deep sedimentary kind. The kind a man carries for years. His mouth moved. He said her name once more, very softly. Sophia. In that single syllable she heard the whole of 18 years. He understood. He had understood the instant she stepped into the light. And there was no part of him, not one atom, that had not already forgiven her. Sal Greco moved. The old man was faster than a 55-year-old should have been. His right hand dropped inside his cashmere coat and came out with a small nickel-plated pistol. The barrel swung toward Sophia, because Sophia was the closer target, because Sophia was the one whose death would hurt the most. Vincent saw it half a second before she did. He did not shout a warning. He did not call her name. He dropped both of his own guns and crossed the space between them in 2 strides, and he put his body between his daughter and the muzzle of Salvatore Greco's pistol. The shot came. Vincent's shoulders jerked forward as though he had been shoved from behind. A bloom of red opened in the center of his white shirt, low and to the left. Sophia fired before she knew she had pulled the trigger. 2 shots, both center mass. Sal Greco sat down on the concrete floor like a child who had been told to, and he fell sideways, and he did not move again. The warehouse went silent. There was only the ticking of a cooling overhead lamp and the wet sound of Vincent Moretti trying to take a breath. Sophia caught him as he collapsed. Her knees hit the concrete. His weight came down across her chest, and the blood from his shirt soaked through her sweater in a sudden hot flood. She lowered him as gently as her shaking body would allow. His head came to rest against her shoulder. Papa. She pressed her hand over the wound. Blood welled between her fingers. Papa, no. Stay with me. Please, Papa. Stay with me. Vincent's eyes moved toward her face. A thin thread of red ran from the corner of his mouth. He did not speak. He only looked at her. The way he had looked at her in a frozen alley on Christmas Eve of 2007, when she had been 3 weeks old and dying of cold, and he had opened his coat to let her in. The paramedics arrived at Warehouse 7 at 12 minutes past 2 in the morning. Sophia had not moved. Her father's body was still cradled against her chest, and her hands were still pressed against the hole in his shirt, and the blood had long since dried into the fabric of her sweater in dark brown continents. When the first medic gently pried her fingers away, she let him, because she no longer had the strength to resist anything. Vincent was alive. Barely. They loaded him into the second ambulance. The first had already left carrying Tony Ricci, who was still breathing against all medical probability, the way certain men refused to die simply because their boss had told them to stay standing. A third wagon arrived for Marco Moretti, but that one did not hurry, because Marco's pulse had stopped 20 minutes earlier on the warehouse floor, and no one in uniform wasted sirens on the dead. Sophia rode in Vincent's ambulance. She did not ask permission. She simply climbed in behind the gurney, and the medics looked at the blood on her hands and the absolute vacancy in her eyes and decided not to be the people who told her no. Massachusetts General received him through the trauma bay. The surgical team had been alerted en route. Vincent was on the table within 7 minutes. Sophia sat in the surgical waiting room for 4 hours. Her sweater was stiff with dried blood. A nurse brought her scrubs to change into. She did not change. Isabella arrived first. At 3:15, she walked into the waiting room with Luca 1 step behind her. Both of them pale, both of them silent. Isabella's eyes passed over Sophia, as though she were a piece of furniture that had been left in the wrong place. She sat down on the opposite bank of chairs. Luca sat beside her. Neither of them spoke to their sister. Chiara arrived an hour later, her arm still in the sling from the Christmas raid. She was 10 years old, and she walked past Sophia without looking at her, and Sophia felt that small, averted face more keenly than any word the others could have spoken. Raphael came. Gianni came. The remaining children of the house on Louisburg Square filed in one by one over the long blue hours, and not one of them looked at her. She had expected this. She had decided on the drive from Cambridge that she would accept it. Accepting it, in theory, she discovered, was nothing at all like being required to endure it while sitting 6 feet from her siblings under fluorescent lights. Elena arrived at 5 in the morning. She crossed the waiting room without pausing. She sat down next to Sophia. She took Sophia's dark, blood-stained hand in both of her own thin ones. She did not speak for a long time. "You came back in time, little one," she said at last. Her voice was very soft. "That is what matters tonight. Everything else, we will carry later." Sophia lowered her head onto Elena's shoulder. She did not weep. She had nothing left inside her with which to weep. Elena simply stroked her hair the way she had stroked it through every childhood fever. At 6:03, a surgeon in a pale green gown came through the double doors. He looked at the assembled family. He gave the careful, neutral report surgeons give when a man was alive but should not be. He said Vincent was conscious. He said Vincent had asked, by name, for Sophia. He said no one else. Isabella's head came up. Her eyes found Sophia's for the first time all night. She did not smile. She did not soften. But after a moment, almost imperceptibly, she nodded once. Sophia rose. She followed the surgeon down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and something warmer beneath it. The specific institutional smell of dying. He left her at the door of the room. She pushed it open with both hands. Vincent lay in the center of a white bed, plugged into 4 machines that hummed and blinked. His face was the color of the wall behind him. A clear tube ran from the side of his mouth. Another ran from his chest and drained into a steady red line somewhere below the mattress. His eyes opened when she stepped to the bed. "Papa, Sophia." His voice was barely more than breath, but it was his voice. She sat down in the plastic chair beside him. She took the hand that did not have a needle in it. "Papa, I am so..." "No." The word cost him a great deal. "Let Papa speak first. Before the drugs, Papa, was wrong to hide it from you. I told myself I was protecting you. That was the story I told myself. The truth is that I was afraid. I was afraid the day you learned, you would stop calling me Papa." Her tears came. She could not stop them. "No, no, Papa. I was the one who was wrong. I betrayed you. I betrayed Isabella. I betrayed Matteo. I opened the door. Papa, I opened the door to the men who, Sophia." He squeezed her hand. The grip was very weak. It was the strongest thing she had ever felt. You are my daughter, and Papa always forgives his daughter. That is the only law in this house that has never needed writing down." She pressed his hand against her wet cheek. He fumbled with his left hand at the bedside table. A small key sat on a square of folded cloth. He pushed it toward her. His eyes had begun to drift. "The safe, little one. The envelope. Open it. It is yours now." His eyes closed. Sophia lifted his hand. She pressed her lips against the back of it, against the knuckles that had once held fairy tales and funeral ropes and her own small face when she had been 3 weeks old, and she stayed there for a long time while the machines kept him breathing for her. Author's note on continuity. The outline specifies that Marco was wounded in the shoulder and later stands to denounce Sophia. I've reconciled this with Part 16. Marco's warehouse injury was severe, but not fatal, and he survived the ambulance ride that Sophia had assumed ended differently. This preserves the intended twist. Vincent Moretti died at 6:41 in the morning, as the first gray light of February crept across the Charles River and touched the windows of his hospital room. He did not open his eyes again. His hand remained in Sophia's until the final breath. The machines sang their last long note, and the nurse reached up and silenced it, and the room was very quiet. The wake was held 3 days later at St. Leonard's in the North End, the same church where a priest had once walked to Louisburg Square to tell a young Don that a family had been slaughtered on Beacon Hill, the same church where Dominic had been eulogized 9 years earlier, the same church where Matteo, 8 years old, had been laid to rest on the same morning his father had first called the meeting that would kill him. 2,000 people came to bury Vincent. Men flew in from Palermo. Capos from Philadelphia and New York waited in line to kiss the ring one last time on his folded hand. The mayor did not attend, but his deputy did, and she stood respectfully in the back with her hat off. The cardinal celebrated the Mass personally, in Latin, because Vincent had asked for it that way in a letter written 7 years before to a priest Elena had trusted with the instructions. Sophia sat in the front pew with her siblings. Isabella was on her left now. Luca was on her right. None of them had spoken to her yet. They had simply moved one seat over to make room for her. And in the grammar of that family, this was everything. After the Mass, the Capos reconvened in the banquet room of a restaurant on Hanover Street that had belonged to the Morettis for 40 years. This was where gathering would have ended, in any other death. Eulogies, grappa, quiet planning for succession, the continuation of an old order through new hands. Marco Moretti stood up instead. His left arm was in a sling beneath his black suit jacket. The warehouse bullet had entered under his collarbone and come to rest against a rib. He had been conscious for most of it. He had played dead only because Sal's men had moved on to the center of the room, and because a man who knew when to lie still on a concrete floor had always lived longer than a man who did not. He had crawled out of the warehouse through a loading bay door before the ambulances arrived. He had walked into the hospital on his own feet 4 hours later, and he had told the press a story about a failed robbery that had been believed by everyone except the 4 men in the room who mattered. He tapped his grappa glass with a ring. The room fell silent. Fratelli, his voice carried the old tremor of grief. I told my nephew. I told him for 18 years. I told him, and tonight we bury him because he did not listen. A dozen capos shifted in their chairs. These children, Marco continued, gesturing with his good hand toward the end of the table where Sophia and her siblings sat. These strays he dragged in from the ashes of other men's houses. They are what killed him. The girl opened a door for Greco shooters on Christmas Eve. The rest of them knew, and did not tell. They have destroyed this family from inside. We sit here in black tonight because Vincenzo preferred the comfort of pretending he had daughters to the hard work of keeping his house clean. He let the accusation settle. I say we begin tonight what my nephew should have begun 10 years ago. I say we clean the house. Nods, slow and grave, moved around the table. 3 capos reached inside their jackets and let their hands rest there. The banquet room thickened with something that was not yet a decision but was about to become one. Sophia stood up. She had a cream envelope in her right hand. The wax seal was broken. She had opened it in her father's study the night before, and she had sat with its contents on the floor until dawn, and her eyes this morning were red but absolutely steady. Papa left a will, she said. Marco turned toward her. He smiled, slow and tired and kind, the smile of an uncle who was about to explain to a niece why her voice did not carry in a room of men. Sophia, little one, this is not the time for Papa left a will, she repeated, and she opened the envelope, and she placed 3 documents on the white tablecloth. She named them in order. She was a first-year Harvard law student. She knew how to name documents in order. The first, she said, is a forensic file my father compiled over 18 years. through 2 private investigators and 1 retired FBI agent he paid in cash. It proves that Salvatore Greco ordered the attack on the Belmonte family in December of 2007. It contains shell casings, phone records, witness depositions taken under guarantee, and 3 signed confessions from Greco soldiers who died of natural causes before they could testify in court. Papa had this evidence for the entire length of my life. The room went very still. The second, she said, lifting the next document, is a list of every capo in this family who has been paid by Greco money across the last 15 years. Papa had been compiling this list for just as long. There are 11 names. A sound like wind moved through the banquet room. The third, she said, and now she did not look down at the paper at all, because she had memorized it, is a single name, the capo who facilitated the Greco payments, the one who passed the money, the one who told Salvatore Greco on Christmas morning of this year that I had photographed the safe. The name, Fratelli, is Marco Moretti. She placed the paper on the table. Marco's face went the color of old paper. He began to speak. He did not finish his sentence. 4 capos stood up at the far end of the table. Men Vincent had quietly marked as loyal across a decade of dinners, and they were on Marco before he had reached the second word. His good hand was pinned to the tablecloth. His injured arm screamed through the sling. He was lifted from his chair without ceremony and carried toward the kitchen door. Sophia did not watch him go. Papa knew, she said quietly, to the men who remained. Papa knew for a long time, and Papa prepared for this night. No one spoke. One by one, they rose, and one by one, they kissed the ring on her right hand. 2 winters folded themselves over the city of Boston. And by the February Sophia turned 20, the name Moretti meant something it had never meant before. She had finished her degree at Harvard Law in 2.5 years. On an accelerated program the dean had approved with a quiet letter she never showed her siblings. She had taken the bar in July. She had passed on the first attempt, in the top 2% of her cohort, with a score that her torts professor had called, in a private email, the best he had read in 15 years of teaching. She had walked out of the examination hall that afternoon, driven directly to St. Michael's Cemetery in the North End, and placed the printed score on her father's grave without ceremony, because she had made him a promise and she had kept it. She did not become what Boston had expected her to become. She did not keep the warehouses. She did not inherit the wars. She did not sit at the head of a banquet table on Hanover Street and wait for men in dark coats to kiss her ring. What she did instead, quietly, across the first year of her command, was far harder and far slower than anything her father had done in 20. She dismantled it. Piece by piece, she folded the old Moretti holdings into a new structure. The warehouses on the harbor became a logistics company, registered and taxed. The restaurants became a hospitality group, audited and transparent. The union contracts were renegotiated under the oversight of a federal monitor she herself had invited in. The 11 capos on her father's list, the ones who had taken Greco money across 15 years, were allowed to retire quietly if they cooperated, and to disappear less quietly if they did not. None chose the second option. Her siblings rose beside her. Isabella ran the hospitality group. Luca, who had always been good with numbers, managed the investment arm. Chiara, now 12, was being tutored for early admission to medical school. Raphael was studying architecture. Gianni had become a remarkable pianist at 16. Each of them had chosen a direction that had nothing to do with the world their father had pulled them from, and each of them understood, without ever discussing it, that this had been the plan all along. On a cold Tuesday in early February, Sophia stood on the sidewalk of Atlantic Avenue and looked up at the glass facade of a newly completed building. Above the doors, in simple brushed steel letters, were 2 names joined by a single dash, Moretti Belmonte Foundation. The foundation's stated mission was printed on the wall of its lobby, in English and Italian, to provide shelter, education, and legal advocacy for children orphaned by organized violence anywhere in the world. The foundation's first grants had already been dispersed to shelters in Palermo, Marseille, and San Juan. She walked into the lobby. She crossed the polished floor. She rode the elevator to the top floor alone. And for a long moment she stood at the window looking out over the harbor where, 2 years earlier, she had walked into a warehouse to say goodbye to her father. That afternoon, she drove to a small Catholic orphanage in Dorchester. A sister in a gray habit led her down a corridor lined with drawings. At the end of the corridor, in a nursery with yellow walls, a boy of 2 years old sat on a rug, carefully stacking wooden blocks. His parents had been killed in a shooting 4 weeks earlier. He had blue eyes, dark hair, and the unnaturally still expression of a child who had already learned that the world could take things away without warning. Sophia knelt on the rug. She did not speak. She simply placed a single block on top of his tower. The boy looked up at her. After a long moment, he placed a block on top of hers. She stayed with him for 3 hours. By the end of the afternoon, she had signed the papers, and the boy had been given a new last name. She named him Vincenzo. The first snow of the season began to fall as she carried him across St. Michael's Cemetery. Wrapped in the fur-lined coat her father had left folded in his wardrobe for 9 winters without wearing. The collar was still soft against the small boy's cheek. The headstone rose plain and gray in the gray afternoon, engraved with only a name and 2 dates and a single word beneath, Padre. Sophia knelt. She set Vincenzo carefully on her knee. From her pocket she took the silver medallion with the engraved B. From her other hand she took the silver ring with the engraved M. She placed them side by side on the base of the stone. "Papa," she said softly, "your law still stands. I will not let another child die in the dark. Not while I am breathing." The snow drifted down around them in slow, deliberate sheets, the way it had once fallen on a man in a long black coat in an alley on Beacon Hill, 18 years before Vincenzo Moretti had been born, and on that night, a single word had been spoken into the cold. "My law is the law." Sophia carried that child home, and in the north end of Boston, to this day, they still tell the story of Don Moretti, the coldest man in the city, the greatest father in the history of his family, and of his daughter, the infant he had found in the snow, who had grown to become the keeper of a lamp that would never be allowed to go out. Dear friends, every family carries secrets. Every parent, at some point, stands between the truth and the child they love, and has to decide which weight to carry. Vincent Moretti chose silence because he believed silence could protect. Sophia Belante learned, at great cost, that love is not measured by the blood we share, but by the people who choose, every single morning, to stay. That is the heart of this story. Family is not given to us. Family is built, day by day, by the small decisions to keep a door open, to sit at the same table, to close the lights gently on a sleeping child. We hope this story moved something in you tonight. Perhaps it reminded you of a father, a mother, an uncle, a stranger who once chose you when they did not have to. If it did, please take a moment to tell them. If this story touched your heart, we would be so grateful if you would hit the subscribe button and click the like, so more stories like this one can reach more hearts around the world. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And please, leave us a comment below. What did this story make you feel? Does it remind you of someone in your own life? Your words are what keep this channel alive, and we read every single one. From all of us here, we wish you good health, a peaceful heart, and many happy days with the people who chose to stay. Thank you for listening. Until the next story, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.